I'd like to introduce our sponsors for this session, R0. Dr. Richard Wade, the chief scientist of R0, and Eli Harris, the co-founder, is powering the second session, and they're with us now. Welcome to the both of you.
Good morning, everybody. Start off a little bit of bad news. I think it's not secret. This virus is totally out of control at this time. Worldwide, we have 11 million cases and 1.7 million deaths. The United States has had 247,000 deaths currently. In the last 14 days, the number of cases has gone up 81%. The number of deaths has gone up 39%, and hospitalizations are up 49%. These are truly remarkable numbers that we have not seen in our lifetime. The virus is everywhere. It's an opportunistic virus that is showing up anytime we let our guard down. The US is now the worst in the world in terms of number of new cases, the number of hospitalizations, and the number of deaths. There is great light at the end of the tunnel here coming up within 3 to 4 months with vaccines. However, we're going to experience in the next 2 to 3 months a really dark period unless we exercise extreme social controls and use interventions such as R0. Most new cases now are in 19 to 49-year-olds. They're younger people. These are the people that are mostly misbehaving out and doing things without masks, without social distancing, without social controls. The positivity rate, whenever you look at numbers, you should always look in the community, what's your positivity rate? The goal is less than 3%. The average for the United States now is 5%. In the Midwest, some Midwest states are up to 50% positivity. That means 1 out of every 2 people showing up to be tested is showing up as positive. The goal is less than 5. The compliance in the US for social distancing, masks, and so forth is abysmally bad. It's very geographically focused. It's about 50%. Only about 50% of the people are wearing masks, social distancing, and not going to big parties. So that's the bad news. The good news is, and there really is some great news, that the disease is being diagnosed earlier. It's more treatable. We've got some great treatments that have come up in the last month, 6 weeks. Remdesivir, antibody treatments has been widely used. The FDA just approved that. And use of steroids. These have all reduced the fatality rate. It used to be if you went into the hospital with COVID, you had a 26% chance of dying. Now it's down to 20%. That's a marked improvement, and we're going to be better than that soon. Vaccines, 2 great vaccines were announced in the last 2 weeks. Pfizer, Moderna, both 95% effective. These are going to be rolled out in the next January, February, March. There's going to be a prioritization of those people who get it, but that's going to be a game changer for this disease. Remember, this is a virus. This is not the first virus we've seen. It won't be the last, and people are going to have a long memory after we get this under control. 2021 is going to be a phase-in of more and more intervention and vaccines, so the viral disease of COVID will be diminished of 2021, but it won't be gone. We're still going to live it for a while. We need to look at layered approach. Even after we get a vaccine, that virus is still going to be out there for some time. We need to continue to look at PPE, social behavior, and looking at ventilation. People don't understand the importance of ventilation and transmission of the disease. I could do a whole seminar on that, but I won't. Manual disinfection. The wiping, cleaning is about 50% effective. Aerosolized sprays are about 80% effective. The air treatment. Now, R0, to conclude my little spiel here, R0 uses UV light. UV light has been shown to be effective for over 100 years. It's a standard of care in hospitals, which have high infectious disease transmission in the hospital. We have taken an R0, this proven technology which it looks like a light. Everybody says, well, it's just a light. Yeah, but the wavelength destroys the RNA and DNA of bacteria and viruses. So anything it touches that has the RNA, protein, DNA is destroyed. And I finish up by saying, this is not the last virus we'll see. The end is near for 2021. We'll see a decrease in COVID, but there will be other viruses. We have seasonal influenza, we have cold, and this UV light is going to be equally effective on those. So, Eli?
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Wade, and thank you everyone for having us today. So my name is Eli Harris. I'm a technologist, an engineer, and an entrepreneur. This is my second hardware manufacturing business here. And when COVID happened, I got in touch with two mentors of mine, also entrepreneurs, and Dr. Wade. And we had a thesis that in a post-COVID world, even beyond COVID, there's going to be new objective standards that are institutionalized for how we approach disinfection in all shared spaces. And parallel to those objective standards, there's also a lot of psychological scar tissue that exists in the public domain as the public gets comfortable going back to shared spaces. So what we did is we started studying hospitals, understanding that ever since their advent, hospitals are a place where we actually encourage the ill to gather, and we have to control the spread of pathogens in those environments. And what we learned is that for the past 78 years, or longer now, the hospitals that use UVC light to turn over operating rooms in between patients have lower incidences of hospital-acquired infections. And that is the gold standard in operating rooms today. So my partners and I got in touch with Dr. Richard Wade, and what we did is we looked at this as fundamentally, this is a lamp on wheels with a timer. There's not that much rocket science. There's no IP. There's no secret sauce. The ability for UVC to inoculate any microorganism, any pathogen, any bacteria, virus, mold, fungi, it's just a function of the amount of light that you emit and how long you run the system. So we got together a group of great engineers, and we just straight up reverse engineered a product. And we built a piece of hardware that outputs more UVC light than anything being sold in the world today. And we're selling it based on the bill of materials and not extracting value out of the healthcare system. What's actually very unique is we embedded a simple Verizon LTE chip in the device. And what that does is you can track who ran the device, which room they ran it in, and what time they ran it. So for the first time ever, you actually have execution compliance. And you can see bathroom 17 was turned over at 9 o'clock last night, but somehow the visitor locker room was missed. So for the first time ever, because right now you send a janitorial crew in and you don't actually know what they did. You don't know what they wiped, what they sprayed, what was done. Maybe they signed their initials on a checklist, but there's no audit trail. There's no compliance. So the ability to run this light in different suites, bathrooms, locker rooms, concession areas, and to be able to track and audit that the disinfection actually happened, that is novel, and that has never been done before. And you can use that reporting, one from a risk mitigation and a compliance perspective, to make sure the job was done, but you can also use that as a marketing tool. And you can show your staff, your players, your fans, that, hey, these spaces were in fact disinfected. So on the one hand, this is old technology that's proven in killing these viruses and bacteria. And on the other hand, it's a tool to show your staff, your players, your community, your fans, that you are in fact treating the spaces. So we're getting incredible traction across the board. Jim Mercurio, Rick Fenton, and Lou Marciani have been great champions for us. The 49ers were the first to adopt. We're doing the entirety of Levi Stadium with a primary focus on the players. Players are an expensive investment, an expensive asset, and you have to keep them safe. So anything a player touches is really important to disinfect. We're also doing the member clubs and suites, the first aid rooms, corporate offices, and it's been both effective at keeping people safe, and secondly at communicating and showing an audit trail of what's being done. So we're thrilled to be here. We're a sponsor of this event, and if you have any questions, we would love to talk to you. Again, there's no silver bullet. It's a layered approach. This is just one tool in your quiver that can help keep people safe, and we'd love to tell you more. So please, you can find us on the sponsor page, and Allison at R0 Systems is your point of contact. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wade and Eli. If you have any questions for R0, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Also visit r0.com, their website, and we look forward to seeing much more of you and your company in the months and years to come. Thank you both very much. We are now joined by MicK O'Connell, Managing Director of Critical Insights Consultancy in the UK, to talk about the international perspective and the various approaches being used by different countries around the world in managing COVID-19 in relation to hosting mass events across sports and entertainment. For those of you that don't know him, MicK has led a variety of organizational models within international, governmental, and law enforcement agencies, having previously worked as Director of Police Services at Interpol, the world's largest law enforcement organization with 194 member countries. During this time, he developed enhanced technology-led innovation between public and private sectors to address government and public safety concerns. He joins us now from Liverpool in the United Kingdom. MicK, welcome to the conference.
Thanks, Ross. Great to be here. Hello, everybody.
So to get things started, can you tell us who you are and your career to date, please?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And it's great to be here, being a sports fan. And times are really challenging. So it's I hope some of the insights and the discussions that we can have can contribute a bit to some of the important topics that are before all of us at the moment. And I remember growing up in Liverpool and going to watch the games with my father and brother, and seeing friends and family, and the smell of the turf as we remember it, stand on pitch side, and the roar of the Kop, that mighty Kop cheering on Liverpool, and the ability to support, to share, to enjoy life, and the moments that they really did bring us together. And it was really that sense of community. It's about feeling part of something bigger than ourselves, and the joy of being a fan, Ross. That was something very special that I think we're all missing. And moving on, then looking at my career, I've had the opportunity to shape safety and security programs for major events all over the world, thankfully. And I remember from my early days as a beat officer, a police officer in London, policing those football matches at the old Arsenal ground, Millwall, West Ham, Wimbledon, and the national games at Wembley, dealing with the good, the bad football fans, whilst also noting, the evolution of policing tactics, stadium design, safety requirements, and accountability to the fans and the public at large. And also, the challenge of being in charge of post-match incident investigations as a detective, dealing with the cases of violence and riots, from organized hooliganism to drunken, chaotic rivalries. And then moving over to Interpol as Director of International Operational Police Support, as you highlighted, both as a specialist and an expert. I had the pleasure to lead a dedicated global command that advanced innovation and the use of biometrics, big data for threat mitigation and intelligence, technology and creative public-private partnerships that evolve global standards of policing, looking at capability and safety with the governing bodies, both with the national police teams, and also helping to design out the risks of terror and organized crime. And importantly, protecting the human rights and the fan, to make their attendance at international events one of excitement and enjoyment, and they're things that we all wish for. I also established Project Stadia with the authorities in Qatar to help them plan for hosting the FIFA World Cup. And I know you're going to hear from one of my former officers on that team, Fala, hopefully in the next day or so with the conference. And that capability has assisted many in a safe and secure international mega event management. And these international events, from the Summer and the Winter Olympics, the Commonwealth Games, the World Cups for football and rugby, working in the Asian Cup, the Copa de America, the pleasure of working on the Super Bowl and the European Cup and Champions League, across the world, all demonstrate to us, I think, the importance of partnerships and also working together. And since leaving my role with Interpol in 2017, I've had the privilege to work with leading colleagues and enterprises in industry as the vice president with NEC Corporation in Japan, And now with my private consultancy of critical insights, and in particular the technology sector, it's important that we seek to drive the evolution of public-private partnerships to enhance the fan experience in regards to safety and security. And things were going fine, but unfortunately then came the pandemic. And the game as we know it, Ross, has completely changed. It's shaken the very foundations of our societies, of our civilization. It's caused us to stop, to think, to reflect and rethink and redesign. And the challenge is simple, we've got to re-emerge better.
What can we learn from other cultures and communities around the world, MicK, and how important from your perspective, is it to work together to try to find solutions going forward?
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, great question. And firstly, as I tell my clients all the time, we've got to have an open mind, a critical eye for detail, and to be prepared to test the ideas and the methodologies important in order for us to improve. And the road to success, from my experience, and working with global leaders in event management and in different cultures, is never ending. I've been privileged to work with many host countries. And what's always impressed me is their desire to learn from previous hosts. But it's interesting to see what they then apply from that learning, the solutions that they adopt. So let me take you through some of these from my own experience. And if I may, let's start with the Olympics. And here, my journey commenced from a UK perspective with the Beijing Summer Games in 2008. I then went on to work with the Winter Games in Vancouver 2010, and then internationally in my role at Interpol with London 2012, Sochi 2014, and Rio 2016, and now working on the industry side, looking into the developments in Japan. And all of these games naturally provided different event models, influenced by political, cultural, and economic objectives. All had the ambition, to put on a spectacle, and within this creates that most precious of phenomena, global sporting village. It's got to be attractive to the fan. It's got to be a sense of community, and generally they leave long-lasting memories. Interestingly, though, all went about it naturally in their own inevitable style, taking a different approach to the fan and their experience. Some noting that the Olympic fan is often quite different from the FIFA World Cup fan, naturally bringing about differentials in policing and security practices. And as we'll see, their interpretations in threat risk for their games all played out in different ways. Their learning produced very different outcomes. And if we look at some of the more obvious event challenges or threats to these games that had an impact on the host and ultimately the fans' ability to enjoy the event, you can learn some fascinating things. So let's start, as we said, with Beijing and China. They suffered from a domestic terror threat, many believe, politically driven at the very beginning. They had press and reporting censorship, environmental and air pollution concerns, human rights concerns, leading to what some reported as a somewhat, sensitive political games for the many that attended. Their partnership model, was not as open. It wasn't as transparent, accountable, or inclusive as others. And this played out into the fan experience too. As such, the approach was often state-driven, top-down, and very prescriptive. But then when we convert that and we look at, Vancouver in Canada, the first Winter Games to suffer a disruptive climatic event with a warm winter, affecting the snow and the cold needed for all their events. Yet the Canadians, as we know, is their inevitable way, they rose to that challenge. They prepared in an open and transparent way with a creative spirit and accountability that permitted self-creativity and a real flexibility to keep the show, or as we used to say, the snow on the road, with over 200 lorry loads of tons of snow to service the events and feed the fans' global expectations for a truly winter event. And then we switch over to London and UK in 2012. And, they were suffering again in a different time setting from the others, and they suffered from the global war on terror. And a key focus for them was international and domestic related terror threats. They had the 7/7 tube bombings the day after the games were awarded to them. Yet they still managed to pull off what some reported as a unique people's game, with volunteers, the fans becoming ambassadors, adding to the sense of occasion, inclusiveness, and fun. And then we move on to Rio and Brazil in 2016. And now this is a really interesting and perhaps the most relevant given the current threat. You know, this was the first games to suffer a localized regional health scare in the form of the Zika virus. You know, and having spent a great deal of time on addressing their national political, local crime, and human rights challenges with them, it was the first event to really experience a fear factor for the fans. You know, initially there was that element on the crime and the personal safety front, but that quickly shifted, Ross, to the, you know, to the health and the wider safety level. You know, with an excess of 500,000 fans due to arrive and reports of 1.5 million infected in the national population by Zika, you know, it was a concern not only for the fan, but also reverberating into challenges for athletes' attendance, especially women. You know, no virus threat for birthdays.
Mhm.
And so, you know, they had to go to a different toolbox, you know, come up with some new measures, you know, virus control solutions, chemical interventions, pharmacology, medical care. You know, we saw at that time, though, unfortunately, limited use of technology due to the nature of the threat, other than weather forecasting, sanitation and monitoring standards, etc. And then we come forward to this year, you know, with Japan, which should have been 2020 games. Again, following this trend on alternative risks, it's now unfortunately the first to be confronted, you know, with the challenge from a global pandemic with COVID-19. And this has brought a whole new spectrum to the need for partnerships, innovation, and importantly, the need for them to be a pathfinder, as there's no one to learn from on this occasion for such an occurrence. You know, an event so challenged that neither the athletes nor the fans can attend, you know, it's actually led to a whole postponement of a year. They need to truly reinvent every aspect of the games, with the athlete and fan journey truly starting well in advance for risk mitigation and a potential for significant health risks to, you know, to their population. And you know, if they get the measures wrong here, they create, you know, in creating their global village and welcoming fans from across the road, the world, it has a serious problem for them. You know, so when we consider the classics of primary threat of terror and crime for these Olympics, and the planning teams seeking to learn from those in the past, as they have, you know, they generally hand over that torch of knowledge to the next country, you know, we can see it's not followed a logical path of history. The risk has gone from politics and terror to climate, and now we're on to health. And, you know, is it any wonder that the fan now has new concerns on trust and in confidence in attending major international sporting events?
Yeah, and you spoke earlier of your work, not just in supporting the Olympics, but also the FIFA World Cup at Interpol through Project Stadia. I'm curious to know, how were the challenges different between these two sporting events, so soccer and the Olympics?
Yeah, naturally, you know, that there were similarities, but you had to look at it from different perspectives. You know, the beautiful game as we know it, you know, the FIFA World Cup, it has a totally different fan base and dynamic. You know, at the events in Brazil in 2014 and Russia 2018, and obviously now we've got Qatar coming up in 2022, the risk focus was quite different from the Olympics. You know, however, the World Cup for both Brazil and Russia, though, they were fortunate because they had complementarity of double learning, you know, with both of them hosting an Olympic event and a FIFA World Cup in close succession. Yet when we look back to the FIFA games, you know, we see a FIFA you know, primary risk profile of politics and terror, you know, both having a direct impact on fans' confidence to travel. You know, with Brazil, there was large internal political strife with widespread protests, riots, you know, strikes, including even within the police. You know, within Russia, it was reported it was the most politically charged World Cup in history. And then when we fast forward to Qatar, and what started out with political tensions again, and that's now diminished as it's all about COVID and health. So again, not just crime, terror, and some violent drunken fans. Again, the needs of the fans have changed for the hosts, and the learning has to change too, as do the outcomes and the solutions. You know, the past was all threat, all hazard, as it is generally, you know, built around the classics of terror, crime, cyber, weather, politics, and economics. But now it's where's the fan? You know, without the fan, there's no event. You know, the invisible threat, the pandemic, is the inhibitor for the now. It's the disruptor for the future. as it's shown itself to be a primary threat. It's placing health front and center, but it also presents an opportunity for us to change and evolve, to ensure sport and major international events can be somewhat pandemic proofed. The major events safety and security equation has changed radically, some would say forever. We need a new rule book, new rules for the road. And with this, Ross, is the opportunity to design in the needs of the fan in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what role do you see security playing now in building confidence for the fan so that they feel safe enough to return to these venues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, Ross, I think that, there's two parts to this answer. Firstly, there's the confidence required from the state authorities and the health administrations that the science can deliver some assurance for the return of large groups of people celebrate, to be able to come and celebrate sport, that it's safe and it doesn't pose a risk to the wider community and society. Secondly, then there's the needs of the fan and creating a new relationship with them that's not one-dimensional. It needs to be multi-dimensional to secure their confidence and trust to return to the terraces, the stadiums, the ice rinks, the golf courses, and the sports fields. Developing new pathways of trust with health now being the primary safety and security threat. That's something we've never experienced before, especially on a global scale. The pathways of trust, has to overlay the classics of the past, the physical security mechanisms. Health is, it's not now just about, first aid and instant response to a terror event. The challenge now is it's the before, it's the middle, and the after. It's absolutely everything to allow the fan to attend and participate. It's similar to the challenges we face with new technology, which, we may get on and discuss later. But, with regard to that root of trust or source of trust now is of critical importance. In the past, we spoke of the last mile for safety and security, twinned with the in-stadium event environment. Now, though, that interpretation, especially at a government level, is a door-to-door journey, not just the immediate confines of the stadium. Also, it's the impact and the reverberations into those patchworks of communities along those journeys and risk to local health services in being able to respond to a spike in COVID cases. We saw at my home team, Liverpool, last season in the Champions League, the visit of Atletico Madrid fans, as the COVID spike had risen in Spain, and we were starting to show signs of it, and concern in the UK. However, the government permitted the match to go ahead. Now, with recent analysis, we see that, Liverpool City and the region suffered its worst surge in COVID cases and deaths in the weeks following the game. Around the same time, again in the UK, we had the Cheltenham Race Festival, bringing horse racing fans from all across the region and the world to this iconic event. And once again, post-event, we saw localized COVID cases soar and risks of the disease being transported to remote communities far and wide with the fans on their return home. These two events, which remained open door international events, crystallize not only the real life consequences and risks to fans' safety during the pandemic, but also directly correlate to the paradigm between how the government now use science to create trust, and then for the fan, how they derive trust and confidence from the authorities in the first instance, as a primary root of trust, and then from the event organizers, the transport authority, hospitality and the hotels, the whole ecosystem, to ensure their chosen pathway can be trusted. Much different from the recent closed-door international events that we've seen with rugby in New Zealand and Australia. And within these channels, you also have heightened sensitivity and a true reflection on diversity of need from the fans. Mental health considerations and conditions have manifest themselves during the pandemic that has generated heightened levels of anxiety across the whole fan demographic. Where there was confidence before, because there was no need for a health risk consideration, there is now an acute sense of anxiety and vulnerability, Ross.
Yeah. And have you seen a shift in the safety formula being used by these event owners and organizers?
Yeah, safety's moved from being one of engineering on stadium design and infrastructure, with policing practices led by intelligence, to now it's one that is anchored in science, to define health. And this science is still very much at its embryonic stage, riddled with conflicting views and interpretations, as it's also new, leading to difficulty in calibrating that root of trust for the fan. We're seeing, conflicting political stances, from an uncertain scientific baseline, leading to conflicting interpretations on community and event safety. And that's leading to sporting bodies being caught between a rock and a hard place as to how they can run their games and matches, leading to huge frustrations with the fans, whose tolerance for abstinence from sporting events is waning, and poses wider societal risks. Fans also, as we know, are intergenerational, which leads to additional complexities due to the differential on the likely impact of COVID on various age ranges, and those with underlying health considerations or disabilities. It also seems to have a more significant risk and impact on those from a BAME background. And when we look at sporting events, always seeking to be for all, that safety paradigm is now seriously compromised.
Yeah, in our previous session, there was some wonderful insights provided from technology, and I'm curious to know your perspective on this. So as industry has looked at technology to try to find these appropriate solutions, what are some of the latest and most promising innovations and technological developments that you've seen globally?
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about technology and innovation, we've got to start with data, first of all, Ross. We now operate in oceans of data. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, and many report it as the new oil or gold, to drive experiences and economies. But it needs to be used wisely to generate the positive outcomes desired, and to ensure that we design out the risks. So again, if I can turn into COVID as an example for the fan experience, it's brought a new challenge to health and sanitation requirements. And this has generated, that fear of return to the stadium or the event. And taking a look at primary activities at the event, for example, movement and momentum, what ways might data technology assist in safeguarding the match day experience? New multi-sensory technologies can better enable foot traffic around stadiums, and look to how to decrease, queuing times and crowding, important issues, in the COVID setting. Stadiums, they've been used to doing things in a certain way, which is now going to be very different. The fans need a different approach. And the event organizers can make use of high-end software to examine different match day scenarios. And a major question and challenge is, what can be done to safely protect the fan, and embed social distancing into the match day operation, as an example, and each stadium is different and each one needs different solutions. Bottlenecks have always been caused at stadium entrances, as an example, and would likely get worse with new physical health screening checks. But making use of technology, these new security and health checks need not just be an operational pressure nor a fan fear for me, but through fan digital ID registration, and the use of biometrics to assure the ID twinned with multi-factor ID of maybe the mobile device, for those that have them, and then maybe you could link that into digital health credentials with the new vaccines that are coming online, stating they're either COVID-free or they've got that active and proven vaccine. You can keep that flow of fans moving and helps create social distance where you couldn't in the past. And it's these technical solutions and mechanisms, that I work on in the aviation and border security settings with partners like ICAO, IATA, the World Economic Forum, and World Travel and Tourism Council. And, with these partners, I aid the development and use of high-end technical technologies for seamless travel and discrete security outcomes of national and international importance. And, and these aren't theoretical concepts. They're running live now in various global settings. And they have the attention of governments to reinforce approval and trust. And this can and should, in my view, be considered for the fan, and opening up stadiums. It also permits significant discrete security dividends, and is a key component of new event management models like we'll see in Tokyo next year, for their Olympics. And modeling and forecasting software, can also show us what may work or if it would cause another problem elsewhere in the stadium. Making use within stadiums of digital tickets, with fans' trusted digital ID can make a big difference to ensuring the fan has greater control of the surfaces and areas that they need to physically be in contact with. And it also permits the event to manage the optimum attendance number. So depending on the stadium and how easy each fan bubble can be safely distanced from the next. So for example, if we found out that a certain amount of spectators will be interacting with others for too long, we look at how that particular problem can be addressed in terms of reducing fan movement or numbers. And when we then identify areas where the fans might be getting too close, be it on the terraces or the concourse, food and beverage outlets or the toilets, you can introduce control measures that can reduce tensions and fear for the fan on sanitation and health, and and increase their confidence to return. And it's the making clever use of that data, the use of smart devices like mobile phones, remote sensors, contactless biometrics. It opens up a whole new world of opportunity for health and sanitation measures. For example, being able to track their movements around the venue and use that to enhance their experience. For example, the use of an app that could be used to direct you to your ticket entry point at the stadium on a predetermined route, and then to ensure that you don't stray outside of your designated zone while inside the stadium. It could be used to notify people about the entry procedure. It could be telling them, for example, that they're approaching security, then to get ready for the health check screening, and then the ticket barriers. And if large queues are forming at one food or beverage area, they can be informed there's a quiet one nearby, or if people buy their food and drink via the app, as an example, they can be directed to a specific collection point. Naturally, the use of fans' personal devices like smartphones, it does require their permission. And noting, global data privacy needs and the likes of GDPR, we've got to be conscious of that. But if it's explained correctly and demonstrates a true value to health and sanitation dividends, then that could, and from my experience, would encourage people to be signing up. And with this in mind, we've seen surveys where fans think stadia, should prioritize investment. And interestingly, when we look at those analyses, it wasn't on the athletes, the players, or the management. 48% of some of those censuses came back saying, they're looking for the investment on stadium facilities, and that can include technology. 40% was on food and drink. Again, technology can have a role to play within that investment. And 30% on another analysis looking at better seating and that environment. Again, opportunities for technology to be of value in those settings.
Yeah, I feel like, the pandemic hit and we were all sent back into a sort of global classroom, all trying to sort of catch up on our health knowledge, etc. But just staying on the technology space for the time being, you've got a lot of experience and expertise in specifically the application of biometrics. This is, something that a lot of people know a lot about, and a lot of people don't know anything about it. So I'd like to push you on this one in terms of, do you believe that they have a value at these venues, at mass events, at major sporting events?
Yeah, I do, Ross. And the use of biometrics and in particular facial recognition is having a dynamic impact both on interaction and convenience for the fan, but also has the potential to drive significant improvements in security. I've seen and I've worked on early experimentation and now delivery of this technology in Japan, the US, the UK, to name a few locations. A key sector I've advised on for this tech and where good lessons can be learned from, with proven potential, is in the international travel with seamless borders. Using your face as your proven and trusted identity token. However, it also presents challenges if its adoption in public and stadium settings, as we've seen in California and South Wales in the UK, with legal challenges based on privacy and authority for its use. So we need to be mindful of that, and in the absence of public consensus and government approval for its use, its application journey remains, a little in turmoil. And this is, it's a shame, as we're also seeing its relevance for safety and security in a COVID setting, as it can assist with contactless identity management, contactless payments, and health screening. My work with partners like the Biometrics Institute as a former director and now member of their advisory council and futures group, which is, there we have a unique team of international experts that help identify and track the trends leading to new ideas and use of biometrics. And, the work that we've done there has led to us generating a number of guidance frameworks for the lawful and proportionate application of this high value technology, that I recommend to all, listening in today and the sporting community. And within this, if I could, provide some further insight is, if I could reference you towards what we developed called 3 laws of biometrics, and I'd advise all that, to think, use these as guiding principles. First of all comes policy, and then the process follows the policy, and then you think about the technology, and that's guided by that policy and process approach. And within this, should be fundamental questions that, like, just because you can use high end technology, should you? And if you choose to use that powerful technology, then please know your use case and know the algorithm that you're using within those settings, as there are significant variables that can either help you or hinder you in its application.
Yeah. Okay, so you've covered facial recognition with regards to biometrics. What are the other innovations for the future that we should be aware of?
I think another area of developing interest I'd draw your attention to is, for example, the use of speech recognition and its possible role in the detection of racial language and hate speech. Globally, we still have the scourge of racial and abusive language. And we've seen recent movements like Black Lives Matter trying to get again to energize change for the better. Most fans have had enough of this reprehensible behavior. We don't want it. They don't want it in their stadia or event. But they're often, they're scared of repercussions for calling it out. And the phenomena has been a constant frustration, through my policing life with, justice often struggling to be achieved due to the fear of repercussions, from victims or in the public wanting to help, to be a witness and calling out the offender. And that's the same for the fans in stadia. They're often sat with friends and family and children. They don't want to get caught up in the fight in the stand, but they want to enjoy the fight, on the pitch between sporting equals. And, most want rid of this conflict. So there's again the possibility of using sophisticated technology as an early alert system to signpost, to event security teams, the use of race or hate language. And you could twin that with CCTV systems and other sensors that, that could assist us in leading to early identification, enhanced prevention measures with warnings on behavior, and if necessary, direct action or even prohibition and prosecution. Through the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and neural language processing, there's now the beginnings of the possibility to make a positive difference. Yes, it's definitely in its early days and not without policy, process, and technology challenges. But again, should we not consider this as a potential to change for good and support the prohibition of this most hateful crime?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to touch upon personalization and your insights in whether you think technology can also provide new innovations on the relationship and communication directly with the fan and the response from that. So the dialogue that's now being created with the fan.
Yeah, I think it can and has a proven ability to communicate directly with the fan, and it has the ability to change that in the way that we deal with it within sport. We've seen it, that change in dynamic and conversation with the fan, has been enhanced, some would say, with betting patterns and new influences from the sporting family coming online to enable a new interactive dynamic. At the heart of this, I've seen and advise on the rapid advancement through, as you spoke before, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and now linking that through 4G and 5G connectivity. Things are going to change rapidly. One line of this development, is the need for clubs to increase fan engagement, and it gives them the ability to listen to act on, fan opinion. There's an interesting article, was written within the Copper 90 report and was looking at fan influence. And it was highlighting how it's set to transform fan engagements across the sporting industry in the coming years with technology, and within that report, it was, highlighting, it won't be long before fans have the power to dictate, player celebrations, as an example, or to decide on substitutions. And demonstrating those new ways to influence and interact directly with the action on the pitch, they're going to emerge. There was another report as well from a piece done by the Nielsen research team, which was looking, with what they looked at, 2/3 of football fans across the globe, demonstrated an interest in voting to influence decision making at their clubs. Huge numbers of fans, when you look at that, 45 million fans in Brazil as an example, 15 million in Germany, 3 million Portugal, and on you go. And the same study found that, over half of those football fans, soccer in the US, worldwide, they'd be interested in purchasing tokens, to give them the right to vote on decisions at their football club. They were willing to pay on average €10 or $10 for the privilege. That's a huge new economic model, but what a dynamic way to engage with the fan. And naturally, all of this talk of technology is exciting, it's ambitious, and the fans generally want and love it. And so my question is, how bold should we be? What's the true nature of our ambition? And I know all of this comes at a cost, but my argument is that by engaging with the fans in a new and meaningful way, you can deliver that attractive, safe and secure, functional community sporting complex that is truly becoming, the hub for entertainment and can lead to wise investment choices in technology. We've seen there may be new economies to be derived out of that as well, and it would be well received and works for the value of all.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to take a moment just now to ask our audience here, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom here to send through your questions. But on the fans, MicK, we've seen some interesting changes in performance and sport. We touched upon in the previous session, how exciting it was, the Tour de France this year. Youngest winner ever, or certainly for a very long time. And, very, very tight race that went right up until the end. We go into stadiums and we're seeing some rather strange results arguably because the fans aren't there. Your own team, I think it was 7-1, they lost quite heavily. And some
Thanks
people
for that, Ross.
was that 7-1? Some people were arguing that if the fans had been there, the pressure, etc., maybe it wouldn't have been so. And there have been others, big teams losing in soccer by 5-6 goals is not normal. Certainly, if you're the underdog to win. So it's interesting how it is affecting things for players and sports in general. But back to the line of question and IIFX. I'd like to get your insights in terms of what you think is the sense of importance of an institute such as IIFX as a global platform to meet. You've spent your career traveling the world and meeting different cultures, people in different countries, hearing from them, exchanging with them. And I'm curious to know, how important do you think a platform such as this is?
Well, I think, if we look at the title of this, session, Ross, I'm a fan, you're a fan, and the rest of it. We don't want to be a number. We want to be recognized as a fan and respected as a fan, and to engage back with the sporting event management and the environment. And I think, with IIFX, you've got the chance for me to rethink the model. What I'm seeing and speaking with global partners on, we shouldn't maybe just be aspiring to move to what we're describing as the new norm for me, it needs more ambition, a new reality through this opportunity, change for the better. We need to be bold, but within that, who's willing to push those boundaries? And I think that IIFX, as a platform, gives us the opportunity to bring attention back to the needs and the ideas of the fan, and to project those internationally, with a real authoritative, independent voice, and it can be ambitious, and it can lead to try and drive that change. Upcoming events provide us the opportunity maybe to start to try and test this new approach with IIFX. As we see, we've got the Summer Games coming up in the Olympics next year with in Tokyo, hopefully. And then we've then got the Football World Cup the year after, in 2022 in Qatar, just around the corner. So I think it gives us the chance to be visionary, to create an aspirational ambition that can deliver a real outcome. And, first of all, that real outcome has got to be getting the fans back in the stadium, allow sport to become, interactive and participative for the fans again. And that new model for the future, can be driven, I think, through IIFX.
Yeah, as seen on the sports field, confidence is a fickle business, and now it turns, from the pitches and from the players to the fans, as you rightly say. I know that there are measures and protocols that collective governments are pushing, and there's the emergence of the vaccine, of several vaccines, but that might not be enough. And we are looking at sports having to reach out, as again we've heard, from our previous session, reaching out to sort of try to, take the temperature of the fans, and we'll slowly start to see that, certainly at the Olympics and the Football World Cup, internationally, and obviously the big national events that take place. But I'm curious about that fan experience, and whether or not we're going to see similar numbers going forward, or whether it is going to be, technology driven.
Well, I think we're definitely going to see the fan return. It's how you calibrate the process and the methodology to allow that to happen. We've been celebrating this last week, the announcements of the vaccines coming online, which is fantastic news. But when you then look at the diversity of sporting events and locations, is there going to be affordability in being able to get that vaccine as a primary vehicle to allow people to come back into the stadium with confidence? And, we've, for those that have had the privilege to travel internationally, where you may need to use a list of vaccines or health credentials like the yellow fever card and that, are we going to trust that sort of policy procedural environment to these new challenges to the future with a piece of card that someone's just handwritten in saying, trust me, I've had a vaccine, and the rest of it, that there's great opportunity for fraud, counterfeiting and exploitation within these settings if we don't, support the scientists that are doing the good work on the good vaccines to allow the fans to get those and to come back into the stadium. So there's a number of mechanisms and measures, I think, that we all need to be considering and working through to give verification to health credentials that are coming into the stadium, and importantly, experiment in a sensible way in the coming years with the architecture that we need, and what the fans will tolerate and be able to afford to be able to tolerate in these settings, to allow us all to be pandemic proof to the future, because this is a new operating environment that's not going to go away. At the moment, it's COVID-19. There's going to be something else that will follow behind it. We've seen some of the incidents in Denmark recently, with another version of COVID seen within the MicK population, which has brought, a different challenge. So we know these viruses are going to keep coming back, but this is giving us a chance to reset the landscape and to think it through in a logical way, bringing the science in, getting that calibrated, using technology. Technology's been an enabler within the scientific development, allowing a vaccine which would normally be computed, developed and processed over 10 years down to an 18-month, 2-year window to get accredited. And so we need to capitalize on all of that to give both a dynamic environment, but really a safe environment for the fans to come back into the stadium.
We've got a nice question that's come in, Mick. I'm going to enjoy putting this one to you. So from David Sawler, I think he's out in California.
Hi, David.
He's hearing from fans that they're eager to attend events.
Yes.
We're seeing this in Europe too. But unfortunately, government agencies are the ones slowing the process by not giving a passport in certain areas. Okay.
Yeah.
What is your feeling on the responsibilities of governments to support industry? And I'm going to add, David, and support the fans.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, having been in a, in a governmental public safety setting in the past, you can never really get it right, 100%. We've seen that with terrorist violence in the past, counterterrorism threats, like we saw with the Manchester Arena bombing and other elements in that regard. So it's super difficult, but there are anomalies at the moment that I think, being a fan and an observer and an expert practitioner in this setting, you are scratching your head. You can allow certain public gatherings in a particular setting, be it in a cinema or whatever, but then in a stadium, you're saying no, that's just not permitted at the moment. And I think part of that is driven with a fear factor at the heart of governments, from what I'm seeing. And that, again, I come back to the point I made earlier with the uncertainty in the science. We're seeing COVID is running away from us in most settings. So any opportunity they've got to try and just keep, proximity down between fans, and particularly, in a sporting setting, fans may get more animated and jubilant because of the passion that goes with sport than they might do sitting in a cinema watching a film or whatever. So there's anomalies there, and I'm not trying to excuse any of this, but it's a challenge. And all I can say is that, going through an evidence-based approach in the way that everyone's trying to, by demonstrating that stadiums are safe and secure, the measures have been put in place, they've got protocols for responsiveness, they've got an active and dynamic engagement with their fans, so they can bring the fans, as I said, you have that door-to-door journey in and out in a safe and controlled way, thinking through the transport challenges and the rest of it. So they're not going to put any of the communities they transit through at risk. Is got to be the way forward. And then bringing that collective interpretation together in a lobbied voice through the likes of IIFX and others, hopefully that logic will end up driving the change that we all need at the political level to give us the sanction to reopen up the stadiums. And I hope it happens, in the UK, we're talking about it maybe being March next year. I hope it's before then, but the numbers at the minute that we're seeing on COVID are scaring everyone at the policy level, which is causing the conflict. So I hope that's answered it a little bit, David, from my own insight.
I'm wondering, as we wrap this up, just finally, what are some of the key takeaways for you?
For me, I think, first of all, the pandemic has demonstrated, I think, sport is quite flat when you haven't got the fans there in the stadiums and being able to enjoy that dynamic with them all, from the Ryder Cup that's taking place at the golf, right the way through to the football, to the Americans football and the rest of it. So we need to get the fans back in, and we need to protect them. The current pandemic has also demonstrated the opportunity to reconnect with the fan and re-cement that community approach to them, and to use technology, science to support a new interpretation of sporting environments and the way that they operate. And within that advancement is the chance to be bold, to make sure that sport doesn't get disrupted in the future the way it has been now on this occasion. It doesn't need to be. If we consolidate the learning that's happening here and bring a critical friend that can bring some critical insight into that, with the likes of IIFX, with a degree of independence, looking and testing all of those systems, structures, science, and the rest of it that's taking place, and give some real informed opinions and guidance for pathways of trust that can come out of that to make it, a far more dynamic, far more exciting world that we've got for the fan and the sport of the future.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your presentation today, and taking
My pleasure.
questions from myself and from the audience. Fans are the focus of the Institute, and every organization and venue in the sports and entertainment industry exists because of the fans. So well said there. We greatly appreciate you taking time to help us consider the fan experience in this new normal. Thank you again to our friends and colleagues over at R0, whose generous sponsorship made this presentation possible. Please check out their website. And thank you all for attending this second session of the conference. Please take the time over the next 2 days to visit our sponsors and exhibitors at their booths in our exhibit area. We're really keen for you to do that, so please head on over there for your digital swag bags. I like to say that. Make sure you follow us on social media. You can also schedule meetings with the representatives of each sponsor at the various booths and reach out to the speakers that we have. MicK, once again, thanks very much. And thank you everyone for joining this session. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Stay safe.